Testing. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, you're all very welcome here today. We're going to make a start. The Minister is en route, but we're going to make a start because we've a good bit of stuff to get through. So, first of all, I'd just like to thank everybody for coming today. So there's still people coming in, but we're going to make the start. And look, before I get going, I just wanted to thank some of our own team here in terms of a lot of organisation that has gone in today. Mags, Aaron and Deborah in particular, and there's been a great team effort. But look, today I suppose is another step on the journey that we're making in terms of our breeding indexes and our EBI, and we've made a lot of progress over the last 15-20 years. And as I say, today is another step, and it's just another step because this is going to keep evolving and keep going. I suppose the one point that I would make is that, look, there's lots of science available and there's lots of science and lots of countries have access to the science. But I think the critical thing that we have here in Ireland that we need to make sure that we mind is the collaboration piece. Because we can have all the science in the world, but unless we can actually get it and execute it at farm level and present it in a way that you as farmers can actually use to make more profitable and more sustainable decisions at farm level, well then it's just science for the sake of science, and to be honest, we're not really interested in that. We want to be making something that's actually going to have an impact out there. And in terms of the collaboration, just want to pay thanks to all the team at Teagasc who are heavily involved in this, Abacus Bio and VistaMilk. Big team effort. As I say, and also to you as farmers who are going to continue to use the EBI, use it as a tool to make decisions. And as I say, what we're talking about today, it's not going to turn the EBI upside down, but it is going to evolve it. And we need to keep that cooperative model so we keep evolving, keep using, but keep delivering on the ground as well. So with that, we're going to start. And Jonathan is first up. We'll probably then have the Minister will arrive probably when Jonathan is finished. So Jonathan, take it over. Thank you, folks. Lovely.
Yeah. So hello everybody. My name is Jonathan Hearn. I'm a researcher in Teagasc Moor Park. My background is the modelling of greenhouse gas emissions from beef, dairy, sheep systems. And today I'm going to be talking to you about the carbon sub-index and the introduction of that into the EBI. I'm doing that on behalf of Lauren Schlew, who did the large body work in this area. So just a bit of an overview of what we talked about, just a background into greenhouse gas modelling. Why do we do it? Greenhouse gas emission weights, the carbon sub-index itself, and then future developments that are coming down the line in the near future. So just about greenhouse gas modelling. Greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture, they are complex to say the least, especially in comparison with other sectors. If you look at an individual farm, there is numerous sources of greenhouse gas emissions, and even within each of those sources, there is large variations. So there's spatial effects, there's temporal effects, and there's even a management effect. All of those contribute to the quantity of emissions being generated from a given source. It's not actually feasible to go out to an individual farm and measure every single emission source over a full farming year. Never mind a whole agricultural sector in a given country. So to address this, mathematical models have been developed basically to replicate a farming system and the activities that might happen. So it's not just the activities, but it's also the flow of nutrients, the flow of materials that would be coming in and out of a farming system. And they dictate then the quantity of greenhouse gas emissions being calculated. There's three main greenhouse gas emissions. We have methane, nitrous oxide, carbon dioxide, importance in that order. Methane coming from the digestion of feed as well as manure. You have nitrous oxide coming from manure and fertiliser, and then you have carbon dioxide, which is relatively minor in compared to the other two, and that comes from the use of fossil fuels and the likes of fertiliser and lime. Teagasc has, I suppose they've put a lot of research in this area over the last number of years. We've recently published a paper on the current average dairy system in Ireland and the future dairy system come 2030, reaching all KPIs. As I said, it's been going on for the last number of years. You can go back over 15 years when this work really started within Teagasc. And as more research comes on stream, that'll help us to improve our understanding how emissions are dictated and how they are generated within a farm, and how we can modify these models to ensure there is a replicable of the actual farming system that's happening in Ireland. So, to calculate the emissions, we use a standard, internationally standardised method, and it's called life cycle assessment. So the overall goal, calculate greenhouse gas emissions from a dairy farm. The scope is everything right up until that product leaves your farm gate. So it's not just what happens within your farm gate, so within your farm boundary. It also takes into account the emissions that's been imported into your system, whether it's through the feed you're bringing in, the energy that you're importing, so whether it's fuel or electricity, as well as other inputs. So let's say, like, think of fertiliser, for example. All those emissions are calculated up to the point that your product leaves your farm, whether it's the milk in the lorry or it's your surplus calves and your cull cows. We, I suppose, condense the emissions down into two categories. We look at animal emissions and general farm emissions. General farm emissions is just your general farm, your farm inputs. Your animal emissions is what we're focused on today. This is the emissions coming from your animals, whether it's the digestion of their feed or the manure that they're excreting. The carbon sub-index takes account of both of these, but we're really focused on the animal emissions and how certain traits influence those emissions. We've previously looked at the effect of EBI. The effect of EBI on greenhouse gas emissions. We did it over the Kilworth farm over in up there beside Moore Park, and what we found is we looked at two groups of animals, high EBI and low EBI, both managed the same way. And what we found is that the high EBI had 10% lower carbon footprint than that of a national average. So basically what this is saying is the EBI is already indirectly selecting for more efficient animals in terms of carbon. And that's caused by you have more fertile animals and you also have higher kilos of milk solids as well. That's all well and good, and it's really it's beneficial in terms of the efficiency of our systems. But what's really stark and very important is that total emissions, or the emissions per hectare, which is a proxy for total, hasn't changed. And this is of concern because we're all well aware of this number that's been out in the media, the 25% reduction in national greenhouse gas emissions come 2030. We need to start going in the right direction in achieving that. So basically the objective of the carbon sub-index is to address that total emissions. Overview. So that we're all well aware of the EBI, what it is, expected average profit per lactation of daughters relative to a base cow. You're identifying more profitable breeding stock. The weights of each trait in a breeding objective is called the economic value, and essentially what it is the change in profit by changing a unit in a specific trait while keeping all others constant. And that's derived using the Teagasc bioeconomical model, that's the Teagasc Moore Park Dairy Systems model, and this has been applied through the years in the agricultural sector. DBI is routinely updated where necessary, so whether it's policy change, price of product, as well as cost of production changes. Very important to note, how the EBI is calculated is that land is the limiting factor. So if you have a farm and you have your, let's say, 40 hectares, if you increase productivity, that will mean the animal needs to have more feed. That feed is imported into the system. The carbon sub-index itself is actually very, very similar in principle to that of the economic value. So the carbon value, instead of profit, is looking at carbon emissions. So the change in total emissions per unit change in a given trait while holding all others constant. All traits have emission values. Some traits will increase emissions, some traits will reduce emissions, and some traits have no effect. What we do is we sum up all these traits together to get the total carbon value, and then we apply an economic value per tonne of carbon. And the price of carbon is €80, and that's what the government proposed as the carbon price come 2030. So that's the reason behind that. So the index itself, as I said, some traits increase, some traits decrease, but all traits are, if you select for them, they'll increase your profitability. So if you look at the traits around production, you look at your milk, your fat, your protein, your carcass weight, when you look at them independently and you select for them, you're going to increase your profit, you have a higher output. But because the models are driven on energy requirement, if you increase productivity, you increase in energy requirement, which means there's more animal-related emissions associated with digestion, and they also are producing more manure. So emissions go up. If we look at the other traits, so the traits that, yes, they increase profitability, but they also reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So you've survival, you've live weight, calving interval, and days to slaughter. I suppose the prime example here, just to explain how this works, is survival and live weight. Survival, you essentially, your animal is around for longer, therefore you need less replacement for one given dairy cow. You've less total emissions. Live weight, how it works is an animal needs a certain quantity of energy to maintain its live weight. The lighter that animal is, the less energy requirement to maintain that live weight. That's the principle behind it. Calving interval, you've longer period of time between lactations. Overall, what this index is going to achieve really is, well, it's going to favour cows that are more fertile. As I said, you've less replacements per one dairy cow. They'll be slightly lighter in terms of, they have a lower maintenance cost. And look, we also need to consider the context of beef coming from the dairy herd, and Alan Toon is going to be talking about that in subsequent slides. Future developments then. So there's quite a body of work being conducted in Teagasc at the moment around methane. Methane is the largest, the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions from the agriculture sector in Ireland. So similar in the same research farm over in Gilbert. We had two cohorts of animals. We had a high EBI cows called the elites, and we had another cohort called the national average, so national average EBI. Using the green feed technology, and you would have seen that outside the front of the Mart there today, the trailer there, we're able to measure methane for each individual animal over a full grazing season, and this is really novel research. And what this research found is that across the full lactation, there was no significant difference in methane per day from the elites in comparison to the national average. And this is very interesting results, because if we use the methodology that's applied in our life cycle assessment models, which we use, as well as the methodologies that applied at a national level to calculate our national greenhouse gas emissions, what we found is that the elites would have a higher methane per day than that of a national average. And that's because, as I'll go back to it, they need higher energy requirement to achieve that increase in productivity. Another interesting finding then on top of that is that the difference between the calculated and measured, there's an 18% difference between the calculated and measured. So we're actually, the methane per day on animals at grass is lower than if we calculate it in the methodologies we have. Combining, I suppose, that the results that we find in terms of methane with milk production, what we're finding is the elite animals produced 8% greater kilos of milk solids than that of the national average, while also maintaining, as I said, the same quantity of methane. So overall, what the EBI is showing here is that you're actually creating a more efficient animal, both on a milk production basis but also a methane basis. You have less methane per kilo of milk solids. This result, it's only 1 year. It's only one grazing season over a relatively small number of animals. We need to do this over multiple years to discount any year effect that might occur, and over, I suppose, a wider range of animals as well, to build up more direct measurements from dairy animals. So overall, in summary, what we have here is we're introducing the carbon sub-index into the EBI. We're one of the first countries in the world that are actually going to be directly taking account of emissions in the index. It's focusing on total emissions, not emissions intensity or your carbon footprint. And as I said, the reason behind that is we have to start striving to try to achieve that 25% reduction in national greenhouse gas emissions. The carbon sub-index itself is going to increase economic weight on traits that reduces emissions. So as I said, the likes of survivability, your calving interval, and it's going to reduce economic weight on traits that will increase emissions. So as I showed before, increased productivity around milk, fat and protein content, and your carcass weights. Overall, the carbon sub-index is going to be, it'll be reflecting 10% of the overall index. And what it's going to achieve really is we're going to direct the agriculture sector towards to produce more efficient animals and more efficient farming systems. So, thank you very much. If you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks very much, Jonathan. Actually, folks, what we might do, if it's okay, is we're going to take the three presentations, because there's a good chance that some of the questions that you might have now might get answered in the next two presentations. So we're going to have Alan Toomey next, and then Mags is going to do. But first of all, I think the Minister is ready, so I'm going to just go and invite the Minister in to actually launch the index. So give us 2 seconds, please. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we'll get going again. Look, it's a great honour to be able to welcome Minister McConalogue here today to launch the carbon sub-index. So, Minister, you're very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sean, and Chairman Michael Doran, and all on the ICBF board and staff, and particularly all of you who have come here today, and all the key stakeholders and representatives. I'm very much delighted to be with you, and it's a really important day for our sector and indeed for agriculture in the country. I'm also delighted to see and grateful that so many of you have taken the time to come here today, because it is an exciting new venture, and it will be a benefit in terms of how it's going to be a way of producing an even more carbon efficient beef product in the country. It's a historic day, and it's a real milestone in the continued development of livestock breeding across Ireland, and particularly in the context of delivering on agriculture's commitment to our climate change commitments. I'm genuinely delighted to be with you to launch a number of positive changes to the Economic Breeding Index, which have come about from extensive research and collaboration between ICBF, Teagasc, VistaMilk and Abacus Bio. Collaborations such as this are what the global climate community are yearning for today, and it shows just how scientific, pioneering and forward-thinking our agriculture sector is. The United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres last week at COP27 in Egypt said that we are on a highway to climate hell with our foot on the accelerator. But what we didn't hear as much of from his same speech were his words that humanity has a choice: cooperate or perish. And that's why the cooperation of so many within the sector for today's announcement is so important. The new carbon sub-index as a component of the EBI that will be outlined today is extremely significant. This carbon sub-index is a world first and highlights that Irish farmers are leading the way in terms of their commitment to climate action. This is exactly the type of forward thinking the Taoiseach Micheál Martin was referring to when he also spoke of COP27 and said, "As leaders we must lead." Our farmers and our agri-sector are leading, and you are very much, have been and will be the leaders of change. In addition, I'm also pleased to officially launch the commercial beef value, which, operating now for a number of months, provides an important tool for non-breeding beef farmers, which will give a better insight into an animal's genetic merit. I know that this will have relevance to farmers that are purchasing calves and weanlings in stores and bringing them through to finish. I'm hugely enthused and excited by these two developments, and it shows the huge resource we have at our disposal. Teagasc and ICBF are the envy of the farming and agriculture anywhere in the world. No farming sector is as advanced as we are here in Ireland. ICBF's mission is to benefit farmers, the agri-food industry and wider communities through the application of science and technology to ensure that farmers and industry make the most of the profitable and sustainable decisions, or make the most profitable and sustainable decisions when it comes to genetic gain. The carbon sub-index and the commercial beef value are two tangible examples of this. Research and developments by the likes of Teagasc and ICBF is being put into practice and is delivering for farmers in a tangible way. The current EBI system has delivered 5 cents per litre in increased profitability on average across our dairy farms, and that's worth €250 per cow. This is not just increased profit, but importantly is also reduced environmental footprint per litre. Furthermore, ICBF is collaborating with Teagasc and Bord Bia in providing the calculations for the new carbon footprint model. Innovation, research and collaboration, as will be seen today, have been the hallmark of the success of the agri-food sector over the years, a sector which employs 170,400 people and creates regional employment opportunities. Many of the future opportunities in the sector will be based on the food systems approach, which has guided the strategic future direction of the sector, as has set out in the Food Vision 2030, focusing on the interconnectivity of food and in particular with the environment and with nutrition and with health. The workings of Food Vision 2030 subgroups will inform the direction of policy in the time ahead. This is particularly important with the economy-wide focus on the delivery of the respective emission ceilings. And as we know, agriculture is required to reduce emissions by 25% before the end of the decade as part of the country's overall emissions, or overall ambition to reduce our emissions by 51% by 2030. And I think this will be a challenging and ambitious target, but it is one we need to work together to meet, and I know one that we will be able to meet as well by all of us putting our shoulder to the wheel. And a real ace up our sleeve in that is animal breeding. Improved breeding has been identified as a concrete action that will not only reduce the environmental footprint on farm, but will also increase profitability. Research has proven that higher EBI cows improve several traits of economic importance. Crucially, these higher EBI cows also improve the carbon footprint of the finished product. The Dairy Beef Index is another breeding tool which needs to be utilised on farms. The use of high DBI bulls will improve the quality of beef animals produced from the dairy herd while having minimal impact on dairy cows' calving performance. Ultimately, using high DBI bulls will create a more sellable calf. Similarly, on the beef side, breeding can make a big contribution to more carbon-efficient animals. ICBF data has shown that prior to the beef data genomics programme, cows were getting bigger with poor female traits such as milk, fertility and survival. Post BDGP and new indexes, we are now seeing positive gains in both female and terminal traits in our cows. Reducing the age of slaughter also has an important role to play. The breeding of more feed-efficient and faster-growing animals has great potential to decrease the lifetime emissions of beef animals. We must ensure that farmers are profitable too, and I think our advancements in the area can help drive profitability. Ultimately, all these initiatives are good for the environment and good for the pocket as well. To conclude, ladies and gentlemen, we're standing as a sector facing into an exciting future with a real sense of optimism despite our many challenges. The environment is at the forefront of all our decisions now as we actively make positive moves towards lowering greenhouse gas emissions. The EBI continues to deliver improved profitability and lower greenhouse gas emissions of the Irish dairy cows. And I firmly believe that the key building blocks through innovations such as the globally leading EBI sub-index we're announcing here today to support the sector on this sustainable journey, an important journey ahead. There will undoubtedly be changes over the years, but I am convinced that our sector will not only endure but flourish because farmers are world-class, backed by best-in-class science and research like what we have here today. So I wish the rest of the session well, and I'm delighted to officially launch the changes to our breeding indices. I hope these advancements help shape your thoughts for the 2023 breeding season. So thank you for coming today. Thank you to Sean and all of the Mart, our chair, and all of the Mart for hosting us. It's good to be here with my colleague James O'Connor, TD, and welcome to a number of our councillors who are joining us here today as well. And also thank you to ICBF and Teagasc for the really important work that they have done and continue to do in supporting all of us in terms of improving our sector, improving our productivity, and really importantly, bringing forward family farm incomes in the process. So, Goramila Mayo Gofkuler. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister, and thanks to the ongoing support from the Department of Agriculture as well in helping ourselves and Teagasc to work through this. So our next talk, folks, is from Alan Toomey. So, Alan, do you want to drive on?
So I'm Alan Toomey and I'm a researcher in Teagasc Moore Park. And just before I go on, I'd just like to say a lot of this work was funded by the Department of Agriculture through the Green Breed Project, and as already been said numerous times, I'd just like to say this was a collaboration between Teagasc, ICBF and Abacus Bio. So I suppose firstly my talk's going to be on giving the updates to the beef sub-index in the EBI. But let's firstly give a bit of a background. So firstly, I suppose there's been a lot of talk over the last couple of years on the beef coming from the dairy herd, on the decline, maybe the concerns of a bobby calf industry and all these talk. And I suppose the big challenge for dairy farmers was to make sure they had a calf that was saleable and also that a beef farmer was willing to take these calves and they could make a margin from. So when we then looked at the genetic trends, and when we actually saw this, and over the last 10 years, due to our breeding objective, we were seeing there was a decline in our beef traits coming from our dairy cows. Maybe not as large as many people were talking in the media, but there was a decline all the same. So over the last 10 years, carcass weight has reduced 10 kilos genetically, and as well as this, we also saw a 0.2 unit decrease in conformation score. And what this led into is a reduced number of animals hitting our carcass specifications. And maybe I'll talk about these a bit more later on in the presentation. So I suppose, Bruno, the big thing is this is the EBI, it's for our breeding dairy cows. So why do we actually need a beef sub-index in our EBI? So till recently, and it's continually increasing, that the national kill of beef animals in this country, the origin is coming from dairy cows. So that's either beef cross dairy or dairy cross dairy animals. They're the growing population of our beef industry. So it's really important that we continue to ensure that our dairy cow does not diminish this beef quality coming from the dairy herd. And then I suppose the other big question I often get is, well, with sex semen, we're going to have no more dairy bull calves. So why does the EBI need to have a beef component? Sure, all my calves will be off a beef bull. And like the Minister said earlier, it's very important that we continue to make improvements in the beef bull used. But the beef bull is only half the equation, that calf is 50% of its genes are coming from its mother, and the other 50% is coming from the beef bull. So we don't want just all the improvements in our beef bull to be diminished by a decline in our dairy cow. So we need to ensure that dairy cow maintains a relatively good beef merit. So I suppose just what the changes we made, and there was 3 main changes we made to the beef sub-index in the EBI, and that was first the inclusion of an age of slaughter trait. And it's been said by Jonathan on how this is reducing carbon, but there's also an economic benefit. And then we also said there's a number of animals falling out of spec coming from the dairy herd, so we included traits to ensure more animals were falling into specification. And finally, our economic values for beef traits hadn't been updated since 2013, so there was a big need to change these. So age of slaughter. So currently our national age of slaughter coming from our beef industry is 28 months for steers. But we see a large variation around this. Some beef farmers can achieve much sooner than this, with down to 18 months, but where we see they might be going into a 24-month system. But we see the majority of farmers, beef farmers, are carrying these up to older ages, around that 30-month mark. And the big challenge here is they're not able to get them fleshy enough or get them to the factory soon enough because they don't have the actual genetic merit to achieve this. So like I said, there's an economic and environmental benefit with age of slaughter. So Jonathan really mentioned here on how our carbon sub-index includes age of slaughter, and what that's doing is that for every day reduction in age of slaughter, we improve the overall carbon efficiency of the overall system, but there's also an economic benefit. And these are coming from, so for every additional day, there's maintenance of that animal on the farm, there's an extra day of labour, facilities, capital, depreciation, increased vet costs, and the costs continue. So up till now, we actually, maybe it was a limitation of our actual our beef breeding indexes, we never had an age of slaughter trait, and that was a lot of due to this was there was a large amount of research to get this off the ground, and now to recently we have an age of slaughter trait, so we can now genetically identify animals that are going to finish sooner. So what it really means is these animals that have a lower breeding value for age of slaughter are going to be fleshier, so they're going to be easier for the beef finisher to finish, they're going to need less concentrates to finish off, and more animals are going to finish off grass, and they're going to be an overall, like I said, economic and environmental benefit. And additionally, just like the carbon sub-index, that's the first in the world, this is also going to be in a cattle breeding objective. This will be the first time age of slaughter has been in a breeding objective for cattle. So a big challenge with age of slaughter, and a lot of the concerns coming from maybe the beef industry was, well, if we just reduce age of slaughter, we're just going to have a smaller animal that's going to be more fleshy, and that animal won't really reach our carcass specifications. But what we can see here, I just plotted our current AI dairy sires, and if we see on the left axis here, this is their genetic merit for carcass weight, and on the bottom we have age of slaughter for genetic merit for age of slaughter. So what we want is, we want beef bulls that are good for age of slaughter and high for carcass merit. And what we can actually see, there's actually very little linkage between them. There's very little correlation, as we say. So what we can see is we can breed for these two traits very easily. And also I'd like to add here is there is a large variation across breed, but also within breed there's big variation within the breed. So we can see the green dots there are more British Friesian type. The orange dots are your Holsteins, and where you can see the black dots is your Jersey population, as what you'd expect. They have a lower carcass merit, but they also have take longer to reach age of slaughter. But again, there's variation amongst all these breeds. And maybe just to focus the mind on what we're trying to achieve, and maybe we haven't achieved now because we were lacking this age of slaughter, is to get those bulls, is the breeding, and after generations of breeding, we're breeding for both these traits together. We hope to shift these beef bulls, or the dairy population, as well as not having a decline in our dairy traits, is to get them up into that top left corner. Those are the bulls that are good for carcass weight and age of slaughter. So I just suppose to focus just on the Holstein Friesians, and this is just the exact same as I previously presented, but these are just your Holstein dairy bulls. And what we can see is there's very little difference in carcass weight, but there's a huge difference in age of slaughter. And if we take two dairy bulls and they have the exact same carcass weight, and there's 25 days difference, and at a cost of 135, and this is 135, this is averaged over the whole year of a beef animal, that's a €34 saving for the beef farmer. So there's €34 less cost for the farmer to take the bull on the left compared to the right, and he gets the exact same carcass weight. So then, as I opened up the presentation, I said that we were getting more animals were falling out of specifications. And what I mean for specifications is there's three main ones. You have a confirmation specification, so animals have to reach a target of O equals or better. They have to hit a fat score of between 2+ and 4 equals. And also maybe there's a bit more conversation around this one, but it's definitely with discussions with the beef industry. This is really where they want and where they're going to pay in the future is they want carcasses to fall within a 280 and a 380 kilo carcass weight. And what we can see here is just looking at the current population, and this is broken up into the beef cross dairy population and the dairy population. We currently have about 20% of our dairy population falling out of spec on carcass weight, but we've up to 70% falling out of spec for that confirmation. Like I said, where these price penalties are, this is where we started putting costs of, with a bull that was higher probability of progeny falling into the out of spec categories, these bulls were penalised for this. So what it really does is it improves with beef bulls with good in-spec, that are good for in-spec, it improves the probability of their progeny to actually reach these carcass specifications. And finally, what we did was the economic update. So like I said at the start, these costs, the carcass value, hadn't been updated since 2013. So we went back and we looked at the last 5 years and what was the actual economic value of carcass weight. And looking at steers that were in O equals, they were on average at 382 over the last 5 years. But as you can see, beef has actually really increased in value in the last couple of years, and we felt this was actually a poor reflection of the beef value because breeding programs are where the industry is going for the next 5-7 years. So we actually put a €450 economic value on carcass weight. And this is compared to, it was only $290 up to now. So there's there's going to be more of an economic weighting on carcass weight to reflect its actual value. But on the same side, there is an increased cost for reaching these carcass weights. So for every kilo you put on, there's a growth cost, so that the animal needs more energy. And there's also a maintenance to keep that kilo gained. So that has to be reflected in our breeding values, so we put in a cost to reflect this. Previously up to now there was a 55 cent per kilo cost, But with the increased cost of feed and such, this is increased to 0.73 in the indexes going forward. So this is going to be a 258 kilo cost on an actual carcass weight, because it was them 73 cent is on a live weight, and on average it's a 50% of a kilo our dairy animals achieve. And finally, I suppose age of slaughter, and I kind of already said this, that we've a cost for every day increase. There's a €135 cost per kilo. And what this is actually done is, and obviously it's different throughout the year, whether they're finished off grass or in beefs or in the inside, it's averaged over the whole production cycle. So over the whole year, it's averaged of the costs. And finally, our confirmation has also increased, so the value of this confirmation has increased. And what our confirmation is based on is, for every increase in confirmation, you get more meat yield from that animal, more high-valued cuts, and that value of those cuts have also increased. So this is going to increase from €10 up to €13 per unit increase. So just to say, well, we've made all these changes, what does it actually achieve? So I just did a validation study, and what that means is I looked at dairy steers and I took their information out of the evaluation and I predicted based on their genetic merit. So 46,000 steers that were slaughtered in large beef herds in 2021 and 2022. And again, their genetic breeding values for beef traits were just based on their ancestry information. So first, I suppose we had to look back to see what we actually achieved. And actually, we were actually doing a relatively good job. Our old beef subindex was actually getting a good improvement on carcass weight. So what I have here is the difference between our bottom 20% and our top 20% on the old beef subindex. So they were making a relatively good difference on carcass weight of 15 kilos heavier for that top 20%. And there was an increased number of animals hitting that specification of 3%, and there was also more animals of that top 20% hitting the confirmation spec. No difference in our animals reaching our fat spec, but there was also an improvement in age of slaughter, but relatively small. There was only 4 days between our dairy bulls that were really good for beef compared to the ones that were really poor for beef traits. Now, where are we going forward? With these updates, with the new economic updates, with the new traits, what can we actually achieve? We're still there's going to be still a difference on carcass weight, but obviously the intensity pressure will have reduced due to other traits in the index, and this is going to reduce slightly, but we're still getting a relatively good difference between our top and bottom of 12 kilos. We're getting an increased number of animals still reaching that carcass specification. We're getting a higher increase in confirmation specification, and also more animals falling in that specification. But finally, I suppose the big one is this new index on the top and bottom, we're getting a 20-day difference. So there's much more animals, and these animals now we're selecting for beef traits, they're going to reach this carcass specifications at a younger age. So what this means is where the real updates, and maybe it's relatively small currently, but with breeding we're going to be able to find out with these new traits, the breeding program will be able to make these differences even bigger. But what we can see is the new beef subindex will build bigger divergence in our dairy population. So it will be easier to select for these traits. We'll have a more probability of animals hitting that confirmation spec, more fitting that fat specification, and most importantly, there's going to be a larger divergence in age of slaughter, so it's going to be easier to pick, and we're going to make larger improvements in age and slaughter of animals coming from that dairy herd. So just to summarise on what I've over the presentation, I suppose with the new traits and the economic costs, this better reflects what's actually being paid to the beef farmer and what his actual costs. So up to now, we never actually had a cost on age of slaughter, so this new beef subindex will better reflect on what actually happens on the ground. And like I said, carcass specifications, animals falling out of spec is a big cost for beef herd owners, so if we can improve the number falling into actually hitting these carcass specs, there's going to be more economic value for that beef farmer. And so then we've also increased the variation. So what we can see is there's going to be a larger divergence in this beef subindex. So there's going to be a €50 difference between your top and bottom 20%, but where previously we only had €29. So what this is going to allow is we're going to have breeding programs going to be allowed, we're going to be able to select, but you're better able to identify these high value, these dairy bulls that are high value for beef without detrimising dairy traits. And what it also does is, on the other end, it will have a more negative impact on the extremely bad. The dairy bulls that are extremely bad for beef traits, it will really penalise them harder. And then finally, and I suppose it's going to be picked up later with Andrew, but this aligns all our beef indexes. Up to now, we had different traits in one index compared to another. So our dairy beef index, our commercial beef value, will now all have the economic value, all the same economic values and all the same beef traits. So it'll be more comparable to use our beef sub-index across all these traits. And I suppose just finally, with on top of this, and Andrew will say it again, is with on top of this, to improve the beef coming from the dairy herd, we also need to increase that usage of our dairy beef index, of the beef sires we use. So that's all from me, and I'll take any questions later on.
Yeah, thanks very much. Thanks very much, Alan. So, as I say, we'll take Mag's presentation now, and then we'll do the questions and answer session. And I know in particular, Jonathan has done, or Alan has done a huge amount of work on that dairy beef side. And just before Mag starts, I mean, one of the things I think it's useful when we talk about the figures and so on, is to just multiply them by 1 million to actually get the impact. So you say 20 days on an aged slaughter, is it that big a deal? But the reality is we're going to have 1 million calves coming off the dairy herd every year. So that's 20 million days less carbon. That's going to start to have a big impact. So multiply any of those figures that Alan is talking about there by 1 million, and suddenly it adds up to a lot of money and a lot of carbon. And that's where the impact is at an industry level, even if people don't always necessarily see it at the individual farm level. So look, Mags, thank you.
Right, thanks, Sean. Okay, so thanks to Jonathan and to Alan there for introducing the carbon subindex to us and the beef subindex updates. And my talk really is going to be how do we incorporate these changes now into the EBI. So the EBI, there's going to be a new evaluation published on Tuesday next week, and this is where you're going to see all the changes. So we're just going to walk through a few of these here now. So maybe as a starting point, let's first just have a quick look at, well, where are we now with the EBI? And many of you would have seen this type of graph before. What we've graphed here is from the introduction of EBI in 2001, what has been the trend? And what we have here is first calving heifers. And you can see there quite clearly that the EBI there in the blue line has been steadily increasing, and so too has the milk and fertility sub-indices. So we're breeding in the right direction, and when you look at maybe just as an example, the 2021 first calving heifers last year were at an EBI of €151 EBI. So that kind of equates there to around a €10 genetic gain per year in terms of EBI. So from Teagasc research, we have heard before how for every €1 increase in your EBI, you see €2 profit on the ground. If we take a 100-cow herd, that's €2,000 more profit for making the most optimal breeding decisions that you can. So it's really, really important that we focus and get the trends right and breed in the right direction. But also, another factor that has really come at us is our environmental challenges. And what we're seeing here, and Jonathan has talked about this in his talk there towards the end, is our carbon outputs. So what has worked really well for us in actual fact and in the research is that while using EBI, by increasing your EBI, we're seeing actually that your carbon footprint has actually reduced by 10%. However, although most of these, the gains there in our carbon footprint is because of our efficiencies in terms of fertility and our survival, so technically we should be able to keep less cows because we need less replacements. That is not the actual fact from an industry perspective. We're seeing a 3% increase in our cow numbers, we're seeing our milk production increasing, and that in terms of total emissions, which is different from our carbon intensity point of view, but the total emissions are seen from a global perspective as increasing. So we have a challenge there and we need to act. And that is why we're launching this carbon index for next week. So again, for those who might be thinking, well, why should we change? You've actually been changing all along. For the last 20 years since EBI has been introduced, we've had over 10 changes in EBI. So the reason we change is because we've new data, we get new methods, and there's new technology. And it's no different from any other technology out there. Back when EBI was introduced in 2001, you had a very different type of phone, and you're probably going around with a 3310, and look at the phones you have today. New technology out there, so better ways of driving some change. Other reasons for change, and it has happened, it's reviewed every year really with Teagasc in terms of our economic values in the EBI. We see that the market price changes, and again the last couple of years then we're seeing quite a difference in our market price changes, so it's something that's constantly under review and is the reason why we would see changes in the EBI and any other index that we're working with. However, one of the big ones, it's high on the agenda in all other industries, but for ourselves, in terms of policy changes, we have been set this target, and it is a challenge in terms of reducing our carbon emissions by 25% by 2030. And when you think about that, it's only 8 years away, and in terms of what breeding can do, and a decision you make when you're picking your bulls, can you make that carbon efficiency even that bit better? So we talked there about why we change EBI, but another thing I want to kind of raise here is how we use EBI. And if we just have a quick look there at the National Breeding Programme, and in terms of the EBI of the dairy heifers that have been born this year alone, right? So you have your EBI there, your sub-indices listed, and we can see that compared to the first calving heifers that we saw in the previous graph of 151 EBI, you can see a nice increase there of 188. So we're making progress, we're going the right direction. And if we have a quick look to see, well, how are we making those changes? And it's because we're using the top genetics out there. So AI companies are out there really actively looking for the best bulls that they can find. However, what are we using? And here's where the discrepancies lie. You can see here in the third column, the top 20 used sires in 2022 are not the top EBI. They match on the milk sub-index in terms of the top bulls out there. However, we can see that we're losing a bit of gain there in our fertility sub-index in terms of where it could be. And also just to point out the fact, are we making relative gains in all the sub-indices? And clearly we're not. So anything there in green means that we are making gains in that sub-index. However, we can see there for each of the groups we have in this table, the beef sub-index there is lying at minus 13. And Alan has clearly pointed out where the challenges lie in that and how we're going to address them. So the categories of change that we see in EBI, I have 4 listed here. So one might be that you have a new sub-index or new trait, and the lads have alluded to a few of those. And the last time we've had anything new in terms of a new sub-index was actually back in 2013 with the management sub-index. And with that came the new traits, milking temperament and milking speed. Another category of change in the EBI is that we have an existing sub-index or trait, but we want to upgrade it, make things better. So the last time we had something like that was in 2020, where we split the calving evaluation. Also, you might remember as well that females were for the first time included in the reference population in genomics. So we have more data in our reference population to try and improve our accuracies in genomics. And in terms of an upgraded trait, we had live weight replacing cull cow weight in 2018. We had a base change back in 2016 for milk and fertility, and that was the last time we've seen one of those. And in terms of economic values, they're constantly under review. We work with Teagasc on this in the Moore Park Dairy System model, and you can see that with the EBI tech, usually it's around 4 to 5 years, there's always an update in those. But for the beef sub-index, as Alan has mentioned, there was no update since 2013. So, that is the reasons for those changes. So, bearing those 4 categories of changes in mind, if we look at the timeline of changes of our EBI, so before EBI was around, it was the RBI, introduction of the EBI, we saw new traits coming in, new sub-indices, and the economic values were set. In 2005, we saw new sub-indices in terms of calving and beef, and that was down to the fact we had new data coming in and better ways of segregating it out and making the evaluations work better for us. And then in more recent times, when genomics was introduced in 2009, we saw more changes in terms of a few more sub-indices being added to the EBI and the base change in 2016. And in the last few years, you can see not that we didn't have much new sub-indices or new traits, but we did have upgrades. So today we're going to focus on what's happening in 2022, and there is quite a lot in terms of new traits, upgrades, base changes and economic values. So this is where the EBI is at the moment in terms of our sub-indices and our traits. And what we're saying is coming in, Jonathan has mentioned the carbon sub-index, so it's a brand new sub-index. You have the beef sub-index from Alan's talk there, and the new traits that have been incorporated, a base change, which Andrew will discuss more later, and then just the updating of the economic values. But also what I want to add in here is that we have some improvements to our health sub-index. So we'll talk about those in a minute, but cell count and TB being the two traits there to go through. And then as well, we're also introducing genomics for minor breeds. So the EBI relative emphasis will change. So you can see here in this slide, we're going to focus our talk here on these three factors here: carbon, beef and health. So what are you going to see? You're going to see a new sub-index being listed in under the EBI. It's direct selection for reduced greenhouse emissions, and it's to aid us in making faster gains in this area, because the challenge is there. If we keep increasing our cow numbers, we're going to need to do something else in terms of trying to meet those targets. And the benefits of breeding as well is the fact it's permanent and cumulative. So for every year that you make advances in your carbon sub-index, and if you were to stop for whatever reason, the animals that you have today will still be better than the animals you had previously. And that's, it's a different technology compared to, other ways of trying to reduce your emissions, like using something like protected urea. You'd reduce your emissions that year, but if you stopped using it, your emissions would be back up. So it's just that difference that, the more we can make the progress, it's a permanent change. So this will be available there on Tuesday, and how you would use it is, it'll be the first time you'll see these figures for carbon. So you're probably very interested to know, well, what is my value? What is the euro value? And what should I be aiming at? So, one of the guidelines would be to look up your EBI scorecards. You have that there for all the existing sub-indices. And in this graphic here, you can see they're blank because we don't have it. It's not launched yet till Tuesday. But also then you'll be looking up your bulls, and be that through your AI companies or in catalogues, but also SAR Advice will be there to help as well in terms of trying to improve your carbon sub-index. So now to give you a taste and a bit of a flavour of the actual values that the carbon sub-index have come out at, I have a few groups here in this table. So for the first group, it's the top 100 bulls. And the average carbon value for those guys is €11. Standard deviation there is the SD, so that's just telling us the variance around that average, so it's €9. And we can see that the min and max carbon sub-index for the top 100 bulls is between -7 and €34. If I just broaden that out a small bit more, and let's look at all active bulls, so we have just 1,260 of those in this analysis. The mean carbon sub-index is €1. So again, just to give you a bit of a flavour, and what is the spread? The spread is bigger, it's 19, you've more animals in this, and their min and max values there are -45 and 56. And for most of you here then, any of the farmers here today, well, what's your value going to be for your herd? So what I did here was I took the dairy herds there was just under 11,000 dairy herds in this summary, and their average carbon sub-index was €6, and it ranging between -27 and 62. So I just graphed that out just so, like, for people that are pulling out their EBIs on Tuesday and want to see, well, where do I lie? For 75% of you out there, so it's around 8,000 herds, you're going to be within these limits, the 75% here on the graph, and it's just telling us that your carbon sub-index will probably lie between €3 and €11. And then, of course, there is going to be the extremities, and we'll go into those in more detail later. So really the advice there would be to improve your carbon sub-index. You're just going to have to use that team of bulls that are better than what your average is going to be. And for, there's different systems out there, you're going to have different values, but for 8,000 dairy farmers there, you're going to be within €3 and €11 bracket. Alan has introduced what we have coming in the beef sub-index, so the new traits, the age at slaughter, the carcass specifications, the base change and the economic value updates. Again, just to give you a flavour of what those values might look like, I have here the top 100 bulls, what their previous value was on the current EBI and what it will be coming forward. So not big changes in the mean, but what I want to draw your attention to there is the spread of the changes. So because we've added new traits, the age at slaughter and the in-spec specifications, we've seen that we're actually spreading out the proofs a bit more, and there's more, the animals are being differentiated more on the beef sub-index. In terms of herds, we're also seeing quite a change there in terms of what you have now, so the average being -12, and it's -4 here on this, but the spread of the changes, just highlighted in there, quite different. So just to show what these look on a graph, on the left there are all the herds plotted on their beef sub-index, so on the horizontal line there is the beef sub-index as it is, and on the vertical axis there it's the beef sub-index with these new changes coming in on Tuesday. And I know the values look very small there, but spread of the changes, the spread of the numbers there is it's just making a bigger differentiation there within each of those animals and herds there. So just better, a better chance to pick bulls that might improve. But what I do want to draw your attentions to there is if we take the top 100 bulls there and just plot them on the same graph there as the cows, you can see they're right there in the belly of the cows, and there isn't any, striking, brilliant top 100 bull on the beef sub-index. And we saw that in one of my first slides there. So, we haven't been making any gains in this area. It's probably not been a big focus, but in terms of what's coming down the line, it will become more of a feature in our breeding decisions. So the lads will pick this up later, so in Andrew's talk, and Donald will be chairing that, so there'll be the use of the DBI to pick your beef bulls will be in that talk and what's coming next year. So I mentioned there about the health sub-index. There's actually a few changes coming to that as well. So first introduced at the cell count that you all know is there. We're just upgrading the model. So we have this model that's been there for a good few years now. It's a 305-day model, and what we're now replacing it with is a test day model. And all this means is that it's going to be more in line with our production evaluation. So your milk, fat and protein is run on a test day model, and now the cell count will also follow suit. So it takes better account of the environmental changes on the day that you milk a cord, so your weather or anything like that. And also then this new trait, TB, is going to be included here in the health sub-index. So it has been a standalone trait since 2019, but it's actually now going into the health sub-index. So this is what your health sub-index is going to look like. So we can see that the cell count, that line was there all along in terms of the previous cell count evaluation, and we're just upgrading now with a new cell count evaluation, and the TB will be sitting there with the health sub-index traits. So this really came about with TB from Siobhan Ring in ICBF. She's a geneticist and specialises in this area. And she just did a bit of a simulation work there on, well, what are the current trends in TB? And it actually just shows here in this graph, the blue line here is showing that we're actually tending a little bit upwards. So it's just getting that bit worse. We've been making no advances in it in terms of trying to meet those targets 2030 in terms of eradication. So by putting TB in under the health sub-index, with a relative emphasis of 5%, she showed that you could actually reduce the TB PTA in the national population. So that's the green line there, tending downwards. So again, just to give you a peek of what the values will look like now going forward. So, you have the health sub-index previously, and now there's going to be these new traits added and what effect they have on the health sub-index. So here we have the top 100 bulls and the herds again. The average is there for the top 100 bulls, not looking too much different, but you can see there a bit of a shift there for the cows. So their average health sub-index values going from 4 to 10. For cell count, you can see, well, why is the health sub-index changing that bit? And we can see again with the top 100 bulls, not much, too much of a change. You want lower figures, so actually on the new EBI, they're doing just that marginally a bit better. But it's actually there when you look at your herds. So herds out there, in terms of your cell count, you've actually been given a more favourable cell count. So that is a reflection of just the different model. So that minus 0.08 is better for cell count. And in terms of TB, they're neck and neck top 100 bulls and the herds out there, their averages are 8. You can see the spread of the change is looking quite similar, with a min-max of 3.13 and 4.13. But just to draw your attention to that comparison there on TB, so the bulls, we see they have the same mean as the herds, but when we graph them out just in terms of the frequency of them, the red line there represents the mean, the 8, but you can see that the bulls, top 100 bulls, are just slightly to the right. It's just a very, very slight skew, and it's something that we should take note of, that, should we can act now with TB in the health sub-index and try select bulls that would reduce our TB prevalence. So that would be saying in the grey corner there that if we could eliminate using animals like that in our herds and in our selection decisions. So that's the indication of the figures. So the PTAs for Selca and TB, as I mentioned, you want lower values for those. In terms of the genomics for minor breeds, we're introducing 10 new breeds. So there was 7 in there, and now we have enough records to introduce these other breeds. Again, the impact of this is that the fact that we have more data, this is the reason we can get them in there. There'll be faster genetic gain within these breeds because now they can genotype for the first time. So this pie chart here is just an example of what the reference population looks like, and it should be no surprises that over 90% of it is still Holstein Friesian. However, there's very low numbers there in our minor breeds, and that will increase over time now that these breeds can also get genomic evaluations. So there were the 4 big changes that are coming into EBI on Tuesday. So what is the impact of all these changes on overall EBI? So again, just to look at the top 100 bulls, you're seeing that their EBI is actually shifting upwards. There's a plus 12 increase in their EBI. And you might be wondering, why is this? So you have the carbon sub-index in there, you have the beef sub-index changes, that base change having a big effect there on the reason why we're seeing a lot of these averages increasing. So the bulls are plotted here on the right, and you can see the black line is, they're just all a bit above the black line, so their EBIs are actually just a slight bit higher. Some bulls actually just a bit below the line, but there's no big deviation there. So the biggest deviation there for 75% of these bulls is between +4 and €19. So 92 of the 100 top bulls stay in the top 100 category. In terms of herds, again, when you open up your EBIs there next week, we should see that the majority of people are seeing an average change in your EBI of +€21. The min and max, -27 and €70. So look, there is herds that are going to see that their EBIs have dropped. Again, we're going to go into a few slides there of why that might be the case. So one example, are all the small cows getting a higher EBI? So what I did here was I took the maintenance sub-index and broke them into 4 categories. So your €10 or less, so roughly you're on the 590 plus kilo live weight cows. Your 10 to 15, your 15 to 20, and your 20 plus cows. So the cows are around 540 kilos or less. And they're the number of herds. In terms of your mean change EBI, we can see there a small bit of differentiation there between the 4 groups. Overall, when we collectively looked at them without splitting by maintenance sub-index, the difference was +€21, but we can see there is actually a clear difference here in some of these groups. So, however, I would highlight here that within these 3 groups, so the 540 or less up to the 590 bracket, the changes are quite similar to each other. So it tends to be that the heavier cows are getting a slightly lower change in EBI, although it's a +€11 increase there. So where are these changes coming from? So what we have here in the green columns is the average for the carbon, the beef and the health. So where we brought in the changes. So it's quite interesting to look at this. So if we look at the mean carbon sub-index, you can see that it's actually favouring the smaller cow in terms of these 4 categories. So you can see that the heavy cows are getting an average of -4 on their carbon sub-index, and with the lightest cows here being a +16. However, it's been given in one hand and taken away in another. If we look at the beef sub-index, It's the reverse trend. It's the bigger cows are getting the increases, so plus €1, which mightn't sound very big, but when we remember back to the first slide we had earlier, the beef subindex average for the national herd is minus 13, so plus 1 is quite a significant change. And you can see the spread there for the 4 categories then for the mean beef subindex, minus 1, minus 6 and minus 22. The health subindex also going in the same direction actually as the beef subindex. So for the top 3 categories there, we can see that their mean health subindex in and around the same values, 10 to 12. However, you can see there for the lightest cows there, it's 7.6. So again, look, just something to be aware of. Is it the cell count? Is it the TB figure that is driving that down? And then the big question, do we meet our climate targets? So the target that's been set overall is to reduce by 25%. And from a breeding point of view, the target has been set at around 1.2. So that's 21% of the total target. So it's quite a big challenge. And we're saying that around 14% of that could come from the dairy herd and 7% will come from the beef herd. So Agriculture Bio have been doing a lot of research with us in this area. And what they have found is, by looking at the current EBI, at the genetic gain that we're currently at, that we're breeding, the more you breed for EBI, the lower your carbon footprint, and they found that you're reducing your carbon equivalent by 11.86 kgs. However, when we look at using this new EBI, so the new subindex for carbon, and then the new traits within the beef subindex, so the age of slaughter, for example, driving efficiencies there, we're seeing that this new EBI that's going to come out on Tuesday is 55% more efficient than what we have at the moment. So that's a good thing. That's going to help with our targets. And if you take the sum that we have 1.6 million dairy cows in the country, that figure results in a 30 kiloton reduction in our carbon CO2 equivalent per year. And over 10 years, that goes up to 300 kilotons. But can we accelerate this more? We're still not meeting our targets. So the more we adopt these new technologies, advance in our breeding decisions, could we actually make that a 400 kiloton drop in our CO2 equivalent? There's other future changes on the way, and Ross will be talking about a lot of these later, but can we enhance our reduction in our emissions? And how could we do this? Could we double our efforts and get this up to 600 or 800? And we think yes. I mean, there's a direct methane trait that's being researched at the moment that could be included in the EBI going forward. Can we adjust our weights? Can we have less replacements? Can we adopt other technologies to help out in this area? And what I'm capturing here in my talk here is only on the dairy side, but in the later talks we're going to see, well, what's coming from the dairy beef? Can we meet our climate targets collectively across all sectors? And what will the cow in 2030 look like? So this graph is just taken from the initial slide of where our trends were at the €151 EBI first calving heifers, and from the simulations again from Agriculture Bio, where are we at? So the dotted line is the current EBI figures, and the solid line there is with this new EBI coming out on Tuesday. And you can see that the lines are very, very close together. So while we can see all these changes and why people might be wondering why in some sub-indices they might have gone down or gone up, the correlation has been very strong between the two EBIs, so the one we have now and the one we're going forward. And we're still making genetic gain. So the EBI, the difference between the current and the new in 10 years' time, we might have lost out on about just €4. But we're increasing our carbon by +5. So that's a good thing, our carbon subindex. We can see also that we're increasing our genetic gain in our fertility, so that's +9. And again, that's no surprise. With carbon in there, it's pushing our efficiencies, so fertility having the efficiency traits in there. And we can see there, all right, that the milk subindex we will not make the same gains in the milk subindex. It's -10 after 10 years, so we're losing about €1 per year. So at the moment, we're making a genetic gain of around €4 to €5 in the milk subindex, and that will now be around 3 to 4 using these simulations. So by emphasising more on fertility, we're providing this opportunity to have more mature cows and have lower replacements. And just the graph here on the right just showing over the last 10 years, well, what has been the pattern of our mature cows versus our young cows. So, it's no surprise there that the green line is the herd size, so the animals that, our herd sizes have gone up. And you can just see there how the trends have changed quite dramatically due to other policy changes, and that was the removal of the quotas back in 2015. You can see a sharp decline in our mature cows, that's the pink line, prior to the removal of the quotas. But it is starting to creep up, which is surely a good thing. That's more efficiencies. And we can see there, the blue line there is our first, the first calves there, so your replacement heifers coming in is actually slightly on the downward trend. So just to finish off, again, Tuesday is the day you're going to see these changes in the EBI, so you're going to see it in your reports, your profiles, your animal search, your catalogues, your active bull lists. Carbon subindex will be, very, obvious there, sitting in the EBI under fertility. There will be a carbon subindex tab, so if anyone wants to go into more detail in terms of the traits that Jonathan has outlined in his first talk, it shows it all there in the tab. In terms of the active bulls, again, carbon subindex will be very prominent and there for people to use. And your beef subindex, age of slaughter, will be sitting under the beef subindex heading, and within the health subindex you'll have your cell count and your TB on display. So really, in summary, these are the 4 main changes that we're bringing in on Tuesday. A lot of change coming there, a lot of it driven by the fact that we have targets to meet, but EBI here is key to drive this change. So with that, I will open up for questions.
Thank you very much, Mags. Okay, a huge amount of work gone into that, Mag, so thank you very much for that. So I'll invite Alan and Jonathan to come back up, and there'll be a few mics roaming around there, so we'll take a few questions. So we're doing okay on time. So happy to take whatever questions people have for any of the 3 talks. So just to remind you, it was Jonathan initially talking about carbon and where we're headed on that, Alan on the beef, and then Mags on how it was all going to come in together onto the indexes together. So happy there to take any questions. Anybody have a question? No question, you're all very shy. Yeah, so can we get a mic there to the middle, please? Pádraig, down here, further down. Yeah, here you go.
I'd just like to ask Megs, with very high EBI bulls that are out there, but on the ground farmers seem to be steering away slightly from very high EBI bulls. As you showed there, the average EBI was a lot lower. Is it, as farmers, are we wrong on the ground, or can we see something you can't see? Thank you.
Good question. So I suppose those top 20 bulls are the first generation of bulls out there, so the youngest bulls. So I suppose it is, known within the industry. There is some people are reluctant to use them. They prefer that they'd have more records. Their reliabilities are a bit lower. But we would emphasise that people should use Gene Ireland, for example. Those first crop of bulls coming out of them are the highest genetic potential bulls out there to make those gains. So there are some people out there that, they're not comfortable using such new bulls, prefer to see a few more records behind them. But yeah, it's a good question.
Okay, anybody else there? Yeah, up here in the middle, Pádraig, please.
Hello. Sorry, just want to ask a general question or general observation in relation to most of what I could see there today. But it seemed to be picking that the most optimum cow as a take-home message to hear today seemed to be a cow with what would have been an old maintenance figure of about 15, which was about a 560 kg cow, based on the carbon that she's going to be, the beef value, and that is coming because the carcass weight that's required by the industry is 280 kgs, whereas if that carcass weight was lowered, that maintenance figure of the cow would perhaps change as well. But so there seems to be a veto on that particular figure of the 280. Am I correct in my observations?
Just to understand, I suppose, the maintenance and the beef subindex, yes, there is a correlation. There is, as you go reduce maintenance, you're going to reduce beef subindex, but they're not 100% the same. So that's the benefit of putting boredom in the breeding programme. We can actually break that trend. So the objective is, the EBI is to pick out those outliers, is to pick out the ones, you can improve your maintenance while also improving beef. I suppose, and what we haven't done up to now, and what I said in my talk, was we've expanded that difference in beef, so we'll make that, break that easier, and going forward in the future generations, it'll make it easier for the AI companies and these to pick out these outliers. On the other question, I suppose, on that 280 carcass weight, I think you were concerned that that might change in the future, is it? Is that correct? I suppose firstly I'd like to say is, it's always going to be more economically benefit to a certain point to a beef farmer to have a heavier carcass weight, but there has been numerous discussions with the meat industry on this spec on the carcass weight, and all the signals that are coming from them is that 280 is where they want to go above that, because what they want, and the reason the carcass weight specification is there, is that it's the steak cuts. So as the carcass gets too heavy or too low, or there's a high processing cost and the steaks are too small to sell to the consumer, and as the carcasses get too big, those steaks are too big. So that's why they want to find that happy medium and get the specification. And at the moment, all the signals are from the market, is that's where it's going to come.
Okay. Thanks, Alan. Yeah, just here, Pádraig. Thank you.
Have we just went to being politically correct in having a carbon index? Because for farmers, the maintenance, beef index and production as they stand are very easy to see and very easy to understand. Carbon is a little bit of an abstract term, and all we've done is we have reduced the various components to add in a carbon index. So effectively, have we done anything?
I'll just make a comment there before Johnson might step in. Just there in one of the last slides there, looking from what Abacus have shown us, you know, the reduction in our carbon equivalent went from 11 up to 18. So by including it, it's quite necessary to reduce our carbon emissions. Like at the moment, we're increasing by 3%. So, you know, by doing nothing, we're actually getting worse. So by having this carbon sub-index in there, from what Abacus have shown us, we can actually reduce it even more by having it, due to the efficiencies in fertility, in terms of less replacements and all those kind of traits.
Yeah, but our figures are going up as gross figures because we're having increased cows doing increased production. But all we've done is tweaked the balance within. Like the index is essentially 100%. And when we add something in, we have to take a piece off the others. Fertility is very easy for as farmers to understand. We can see the nearer we get to 365, the better. Maintenance figure as it goes up, and hopefully then as the milk figure goes up, we have a more production from a cow requiring less maintenance. That's a carbon benefit. Like, the whole issue there's a greater thing here than just what happens in Ireland, because while we're going to go forward and have to reduce numbers, the demand for meat and dairy worldwide is growing. So for every cow we lose here, there's an extra cow going to go into Brazil. And with the result, there's an extra acre of forest going to be deforested. So actually, are we doing anything for the world carbon emissions? And I would suggest that we are not.
Lawrence, can we get a mic there to Lawrence Bryan, please?
And Brendan's point is valid, but I suppose when the EBI was launched in 2001, we had A plus B minus C built into the EBI. We didn't start implementing it until 2007-8. So, like, we're not being paid for carbon reductions at the moment, but all we need to do is look at New Zealand, what has happened there in the last month, where farmers are going to be taxed on carbon. So, yeah, there's no monetary value on carbon at the moment. In 4, 5, 6 years' time, I think that probably won't be the case. So we need to get ahead of it, and what we're doing now by bringing this into the index is getting ahead of it. And you're right, in terms of emissions intensity. All of our data tells us that we're reducing our emissions intensity with EBI, and that's brilliant. Unfortunately, that's not what we're counting. We're counting overall emissions. So what we're trying to, this adjustment will get us to do both. And that's all really we're trying to do.
Do you want to come back? Yeah.
What I'm saying is the old system was doing both. And the breakdown or the components of it that we as farmers looked at were very easy to understand and implement. As I say, a carbon figure is abstract. Okay. Now, they are right in that what is going to happen, but look, we leave it at that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, Brian, can we get a mic up here, please? And then Lawrence after that. Yeah. No, you're okay.
Yeah, look, I think the current system needed change, like when you're looking at carbon, because if you look at the top 75 bulls, and that's all I printed out in the first shot, there's only 24 bulls with a maintenance figure of 15 plus. And the top 20 there have an average of 15, and one of those is in Jersey. So we'll take out the Jersey. I'm sure that'll drop one or two. So definitely the direction the industry was going was for, a cow that was going to be, less carbon friendly, and there needed to be a change. And I hope it will make a change, because to have that many bulls out of the top 75, I would call an inadequate maintenance figure wasn't good enough. So I think hopefully now the industry will take note based on the new calculations in the EBI. And I suppose based on Lawrence's comment there about the A plus B minus C to anyone for ICOS here, there definitely needs to be greater changes there as well, just to add to Lawrence's comment there.
Okay, thanks very much. Okay, anybody else with a question? Yeah, this gentleman here, Pádraig, if you mind, please.
Just in relation there to carbon footprint and the so-called $0.04 processing cost there for every litre in some co-ops, and some co-ops are lower and some co-ops are higher. When are the co-ops going to implement changes in relation to the energy costs that are after increasing dramatically there? So we're with the last few years, the processing costs there are still the same, but they're not the same. They're actually a lot higher now. So I'm just wondering, should there be something put in place that we actually get rewarded for a higher percentage of the fat and protein, and be penalised on volume? I'm just wondering in relation to the processing costs there. It's probably implemented in the carbon footprint in relation to the EBI, but I'm not sure it's implemented in relation to the co-ops.
Okay, I'm actually going to flick over here to Lawrence on the economics of that, please.
Yeah,
thanks,
so that C component in A plus B minus C is the volume-related processing costs, and you're right. In the last 2 or 3 years, we're seeing massive increases. So it's probably something that needs to be looked at again in all those A plus B minus C calculations. Just to make the point, though, when we look around the world, our C is very much in line with what's the C around the world. Like, for example, take New Zealand. I think the figure is 3.5 New Zealand cent. So we're not out of kilter. Yeah, we probably need to relook at it again, but it's not the total processing costs, it's the volume-related processing costs, and they certainly have increased. But globally, we're not out of kilter.
Okay, thanks, Lawrence. Anybody else? We maybe take we maybe have a chance for one more question if anybody wanted to ask. Yeah, gentleman up the back there. Thanks, Sheena.
Just on the beef side of the things, of the dairy herds, I know of one man that went into a yard and picked the 3 worst Angus bulls that were in the yard because he said, I don't want to see him calving. You have the facilities there for the people that are buying the calves. to put up on the cards who the bull, the sire of the calf, what their dairy beef index and plus their carcass on the card, so that when they're sold inside here, they're coming up so that the person that's buying will promote the better side of breeding the animals.
Okay. I think that's a great segue, and we're going to leave it there because Andrew is going to answer that in his next presentation, and we might move straight on to that presentation. That's okay. Is that okay? Megs, Jonathan and Alan, thank you very much for your work there. Thank you very much. Great work.
Okay. Oh, Jesus. Is this on? Okay, that was a beautiful segue, as Sean said, into our next session. So we just have two speakers at our next session. First up is Andrew talking about the CBV, and then we're going to have Ross Evans from ICBF bringing us into what the future from a carbon perspective is going to be. Then we're going to open up for maybe 20-30 minutes questions. We'll be joined by Doreen Corridan, the CEO of Munster Bovine. So get your questions ready. I'm going to make my way down to the floor, so we'll be passing out the microphone.
Thank you very much, Donna. So I'm going to cover really some dairy beef developments. What we're looking at here are the changes that are going to happen really in 2023 going forward. So and I'm going to cover off, first of all, really the dairy beef side of it, and then my colleague Ross Evans is going to cover some of the methane stuff. So, I mean, a wee bit of this has been covered to a certain extent by Alan. But look, the reality of it is there's a few slides here at the start just to pitch where we're at. And, you know, if we look at these sorts of numbers that are up here above, or these trends, you know, it's very, very clear. Suckler cows have been declining by about 3% per year. So if we look forward to 2030, what do we expect to see? The current projections, just plotting those lines, we're looking at about 650,000 suckler beef calves. We're effectively, the blue line, talking about a more or less stable number of dairy calves. So these are your dairy times dairy calves at about 700,000. Now there's an important point in that, two important points. It's assuming that we have a largely stable dairy herd, and it's also assuming, and I think it's fair to assume this at this stage, that the live exports of calves will have gone. And, you know, I think everybody would acknowledge that that's on borrowed time, but that's certainly going to bring 150,000 dairy calves back into the system. But it's the beef from the dairy herd, and that's going to be driven largely by sex semen, which is doubling on farms at the moment. About 30% of dairy farmers used sex semen last year, or this spring past, about 10 to 15% of their dairy inseminations, but it's been doubling. So we're anticipating it's going to be up on maybe 900,000 dairy beef calves. And that's going to present a challenge for us as a dairy industry, and also from a broader beef industry as well. Again, I'm just going to highlight some of the challenges. The comment that was made earlier on, that largely dairy farmers, as dairy farmers, we've been pretty indifferent to beef in terms of the dairy herd. We've done a great job in terms of EBI. We've done a great job at focusing in on the relevant sub-indexes. But it's not high on the agenda. Farmers are not looking at the beef sub-index when they're selecting a dairy bull. And that's reflected in a survey we would have done with Teagasc there, with discussion groups. You know, you can see calf quality and value is really right at the bottom of the list. Now, when we asked about dairy beef, the areas that they were certainly prepared, dairy farmers are prepared to look at, is certainly the whole dairy beef index, sex semen, say, for example. And an important one is really linking through with potentially with calf rearers. And it's that indifference largely to the EBI, and I'm not going to go into this has been covered, but you know, that's that downward trend that has been happening in terms of the beef sub-index within the EBI. Mags earlier on showed the trends around milk and fertility and stuff like that, all going in the right direction. And the sub-indexes have largely been going in the staying stable or going in the right direction, with the exception of beef. And that's why we felt we needed to make some of the tweaks that we brought into the EBI. But the beef one, as you've identified, has been one that's particularly challenging because it's working against, in many ways, the maintenance. And I know that question was pointed out as well. So it's about striking a balance. And I thought Alan gave a super answer to the question, which was, and how are we really going to address beef from the dairy herd, in terms of dairy sire selection? Well, really, it's going to be around the breeding programme. We're going to have to be looking for the young male calves that are breaking that correlation. So, this is the correlation between that maintenance sub-index and the beef sub-index. And what we're really going to be looking to find in the future are going to be the sires that are high EBI, but that are also giving you the right sorts of calves in terms of both on a maintenance, but are also going to have a calf that's going to hit the target market spec. So it's about breaking that correlation. You'll find them. They will be there increasingly in the future. And if you don't have confidence in that, if we were here 15 years ago, you would say, and I know lots of people said you couldn't get high EBI bulls that would give us both milk and fertility. Lots of people remember that. But that was a good example of breaking the correlation. The two traits were working against each other, but of course EBI, the breeding programme, and now we simply have high EBI bulls that have good milk solids and good fertility. And we'll do the exact same with maintenance and beef. Just take us a couple of years to get there, but very confident we will. And I suppose that's in the context of the dairy cow side, but what I want to then also talk about then is actually, and what about on the beef side? The beef sires that have been used in the dairy herd, and again I'll go back to the comment that was made, certainly there's been a lot of indifference, and that blue line is the genetic trend for AI bred beef calves based on their commercial beef value, calves born each year. And you can see that certainly that was going in the wrong direction. In fairness, the Dairy Beef Index was launched in 2019, and first thing, in fairness, the AI companies did, and the people on the ground, they simply stopped making those really easy calf and low CBV bulls available in tanks. And that has had the effect of at least stabilising that downward trend. But what we haven't seen as an industry, we haven't seen it starting to increase like the way we need it to increase. And that's also reflected in the green line, which is the stock bull bred calves. And these are the sorts of numbers of calves that we're talking about. There's currently 600,000 of them, about 20 dairy beef calves, 25% are AI bred, about 40% are stock bull bred, and then 35% have no sire recorded. And that's where the whole area of genotyping has great potential going forward to give us an exact picture in terms of all of the calves, those surplus dairy beef calves that are being bred on farms. And that's going to be a big focus, certainly with Teagasc going forward. It's about how to really increase the number of AI bred and high beef merit calves that are going through into the industry. And why is that important? Well, this is a very, very, in many ways, this highlights the risk that we would see from an industry perspective of not working more closely together on this one. These are the numbers of herds that are rearing calves. The calves that are sold here in Cork Marts or wherever, at sort of 3 weeks of age. And over the last 5 years, the number of rearers has been growing. There's about 10,000 rearers now, taking about 35 calves on average. The 3-4 week old calf. Okay? That's the 364,000 calves. So that is that's trending up. But remember what I said earlier on. Well, if the 600,000 calves goes to 900,000, therein lies the challenge. And also the calves that are on the boat at the moment that have to come back into the system. So we need more calf rearers. Now, the one thing we see is whenever we look at calf rearers and the profile of calf rearers, is that of the 10,000 guys that are rearing calves, there's only 42% of them have stayed with it every year. So when they started, that they said to themselves, here, this is a business, this is a system, this is something I can make a bit of money in. There's actually only 42% of them have stayed with it each year from when they started. So it tells us it's a very fickle, challenging, risky enterprise to get into. So that pushes it back on us as an industry. Well, how do we make it a bit easier for them? And of course, one way to make it a bit easier for them is to start to think about the beef merit of the calf that we're generating. So that's the challenge that we face, you know, as a dairy farmer, as a dairy industry. How do we take something that's currently viewed largely as a byproduct, but develop it into an important additional asset for our industry? And I suppose what ICBF and Teagasc are here talking about today is the specific role of genetics. And of course, whatever we do now has to be fitted within the broader context of all of the challenges that we're facing, particularly around sustainability, climate and environment. So there's lots of challenges, but there's lots of real positives that are happening that certainly from an ICBF and Teagasc standpoint, we see these as real opportunities. And I'm just going to talk and touch on a few of them here now in terms of some of the initiatives that are currently in operation to really help facilitate this dairy beef integration that we need. One is there's a group that meet, and a cross-industry group that meet, involving the Department of Agriculture, coordinated by the Department, but involving all of the key stakeholders in the industry, both the government agencies, but then also the industry, whether it's ICBF or whether it's the meat processing, the dairy processing, the AI industry, etc. They're all there working together in terms of developing across industry programs. So that's very important and it's very positive. As a consequence of that, this group or that group are now starting to engage and communicate with herd owners. A good example of that was the letters that you would have received as dairy farmers last spring. Every farmer in the country, 15,000 farmers, got them with their herd EBI reports in terms of the herd strengths and weaknesses, but also now with a specific focus around dairy beef. So the goals are to breed a dairy cow, and you can see whether it's healthy and resource efficient, sustainable, but also produce a calf that can integrate into the industry. And a good example of that industry working together, and particularly looking to address that third part, was obviously the work that ICOS have been doing with their dairy processor members in terms of particularly addressing that whole area of the really low merit calf, the low value calf. And it's one of the statistics that as an industry, you know, had been starting to trend in the wrong direction, which was the whole area of calf slaughtering. And it certainly was one that from a broad industry perspective, a government perspective, for every farmer in the room, you know, it's not a route we want to go down. It's not a route we need to go down. So it was about finding those alternatives. And that's there now in the ICOS Calf Welfare Charter. It's going to be there in the context of certainly new KPIs, key performance indicators, that you as dairy farmers can expect to see from next year, that are going to highlight some of the key metrics around dairy beef integration that will help to underpin and support better dairy beef integration in the future. And that's going to be important as a dairy farmer, because dairy beef integration is going to become part of your dairy sustainability. If you think about it from a dairy industry perspective, sustainability, a big part of that is around welfare, it is around dairy beef integration. So these are the sorts of metrics that we're currently working with within that group, within the various stakeholders, to address and identify KPIs that will help us cover the whole area of welfare, health, image, but also genetics, also carcass performance. So expect to see some sort of overall dairy beef KPI in the future. Updating the EBI has been very, very well covered here today in terms of, you know, Mags and Jonathan's talks earlier on, and also Alan's. So that's a big part of the overall strategy. The other one that you're going to see new for January 2023 is a dairy beef index. We're not an updated dairy beef index. We're not here launching that today because it's certainly from an implementation perspective where it's at. It has been reviewed. It has gone through the technical advisory group within ICBF. It has gone through the board of ICBF. And certainly it's updates that we would see bringing it into the next official evaluation run in January 2023. And what are you likely to see in the context of that updated dairy beef index? It was a world first when it was launched there back in 2019. These are the traits that are there in the dairy beef index. Currently, there's about a 50-50 weighting of the calving versus the beef traits. So you as a dairy farmer want easy calving with a decent calf. There's going to be a slight shift a bit more towards the beef traits. It'll incorporate carbon. It'll incorporate the earlier finishing age traits that we talked about earlier on. So that's and some new changes we're going to see, certainly in the context of dairy beef and the Dairy Beef Index coming forward in January 23. I mean, what impact will it have? Not that large in terms of overall rankings, about correlation of about 0.9. But what you'll generally see, and I think this is probably, again reflective of what people's expectations would be in terms of dairy beef in the future. And certainly the incorporation of the carbon, and particularly the earlier finishing age, is going to reward, for example, those breeds that are able to get animals, and those sires and breeds that are able to get animals away to market at an earlier finishing age. So we'd certainly see a bit of a lift up in terms of, for example, the earlier maturing breeds, maybe relative to some of the later maturing heavier beef breeds. So, as I say, that is planned to go live then in January 2023. A part of that Dairy Beef Index will also then flow through into the commercial beef value. Now, that was launched here today. So, certainly in terms of calves, and as they're genotyped and as those calves start to become available through Mart display boards, etc., we're going to be making that available to buyers, potential buyers. And, people are well aware of what is it. It is at this stage, it's the beef merit, part of the Dairy Beef Index, but it's really, we don't need to worry about the calving because the cow is calved, the calf is on the ground. We're really focused in on the terminal traits. So that's what's going to be there for animals, for calves, for stores, for weanlings going forward. And of course, today is about an opportunity to start to talk about that in the context of potential purchasing decisions in the future. I mean, importantly, the question is asked, does it work or will it work? And this is a bit of nice work that my colleague Ross Evans has done, looking at looking at the commercial beef value in the context of animals finished at Tully, so the performance test station up in Kildare. So we would have about 1,200 animals gone through that system where we're collecting carcass data, feed intake data, also the methane, the green feed system, you saw grams per day methane data. So what's it telling us if we look at the beef on dairy animals, or if you even look at the dairy bred steers that we have gone through, and you'll see the new range in sort of commercial beef values, going from sort of -2 for the bottom 20% up to 80 for the top 20% of dairy bred steers. And then you can look at the sort of the beef on dairy going from 80 up to 200. But crucially, what's that commercial beef value doing? Well, look, you can see it's really driving efficiencies around additional carcass weight for age, and with a lower cost of feed, and with less methane per day, less grams per methane per day. And look, that's what we want. If you go back to the carbon discussion earlier on, we want cows that will produce more milk, or progeny that will produce more beef, but are going to be more resource efficient, a lower cost of feed, a lower grams of methane per day. And that's certainly where that commercial beef value is taken us to. So very, very positive developments, and it's certainly going to be a new index that's going to certainly help to just drive that change that we need in terms of purchasing decisions on farms. And a key part of that is going to be genotyping, and I don't need to dwell or labour on that. I mean, there's a conversation, very positive conversations now around genotyping out the national cattle herd. And look, there's a lot of stakeholders in the room are well aware of what those discussions with government, with the broader industry, and it's a priority project to start to genotype out the national cow herd, and then the calves. As you finish out a cow herd, then you're starting with the calves, really starting potentially later next year, but into 24 and 25. And the last piece I'd acknowledge is then the very strong industry initiatives, whether it's the Glanbia Keepack or ABP, what they're doing, Cork Marts in terms of the initiatives here. It's about you as dairy farmers more and more looking at those opportunities to get into those across industry initiatives. And one example of that, and we have some cattle here today, and maybe Chris, if you just start to put them through, in terms of And these are cattle that are ABP are involved with us in the Gene Ireland Dairy Beef Programme. So these are just 2 animals. I think it's the Herefords are coming in. First of all, am I correct? Yeah. So again, the key point here, we have 2 cattle in the ring. And, you know, to a certain extent, you're probably looking at them and saying, like, well, they're 2, you know, black white-head cattle. There's not a lot of difference in them. But actually, if you look at them there, and then if you look up above in terms of the key bits of data that we have in these 2 groups and these 2 animals, well, you can see that there's a difference of €80 between them in terms of their commercial beef value. They're very, very similar ages. But their sires, you know, by 2 Hereford sires with a significantly different beef sub-index, and certainly then in terms of that's reflected then into their commercial beef value. And the 2 cattle have been weighed, and you can see the difference as they turn around there. I mean, number 2 is 80 kilos heavier than the animal with number 1 in the back there. And if you talk about that in the context of predicting that through to a carcass value at a sort of a, you know, if you take €5 a kilo for them with the bonuses, the Hereford bonuses and all that there, you know, there's a difference of €200. Now, would you like to know that if you were a calf buyer? Because, ironically, lot number 1 cost more as a calf. You know, if the calf prices are there, Stephen Connolly's in the audience, I'm not sure if you bought them, but he paid $275 for calf number 1, and you paid $230 for calf number 2. So it's a great example of how the commercial beef value, the fact that they're genotyped, how that can actually help inform calf buyers in the future, to put science then on what we're endeavouring to do to take the industry in the right direction. Maybe just put the 2 Angus cattle in. Oh yes, and I should acknowledge that the Catherine has the bit of data up there, and you can see animal number 1 has a commercial beef value of €7, and lot number 2, Catherine then, has a commercial beef value of €82. So that's the sort of data that you can expect to see in Mart display boards going forward. And then we have 2 Angus animals here as well that are going to come in. And again, if we look at them, you know, a difference of about €50 there in their commercial beef value, similar enough purchase price. But I think ironically, and you know, maybe there's a bit of, well, these animals are all reared together. They're purchased as calves and have been reared together. Have been on the ABP farm down in Carlow. Actually, there's a much more significant difference in the carcass weights of these 2 animals, which will be much more obvious and striking when they come in. But you can see that, you know, based on their current carcass, current live weights, 550 kilos versus 680 kilos. Well, I mean, there's a difference potentially there of €350 at those 2 animals in terms of finishing. But at one other stage, there were 2 black calves in the ring, you know, and I suppose that's, again, I come back to the science that we want to increasingly bring to the fore in the context of the commercial beef value. And I suppose just to finish by saying, and that's where you as dairy farmers have an absolutely key role in this, because, you know, it's through your decisions around dairy beef, around the bulls you're using, on your cows, the changes we've made on the EBI to generate these calves, to help us integrate into the beef industry going forward, to get the gains we need, to keep the rearers there, to grow the rearers, which we all need, and all of that is feeding into sustainability, climate, environment, profitability for you in the future. So look, with that I'm going to finish and hand over to my colleague Ross Evans. I don't think I need to go through the summary slide at this stage. Donald Berry's already telling me, no, finished. I'm out of time. So Ross, thank you very much, and thank you, Catherine. And so Ross Evans.
Okay, everyone, you'll be glad to know, probably getting hungry, this is the shortest talk of the day. It's just to outline how methane is being collected and what the strategy is from an Irish perspective as to how we can actually ramp it up now and see if we can get some genetic indexes on it. So if we look at the background to it, and we refer back to Jonathan's talk, the very first talk there, and he showed all the sources of greenhouse gas emissions on the dairy herd, and you can see that there is numerous different sources of it.
But the recent modelling that Jonathan and Lawrence have done that kind of indicates that about 57% of the total emissions is coming from enteric methane. It's the methane excreted by the animal, either burped out the mouth or excreted out the back passage. So the big questions there is does that vary by animal? Is it a trait that's herdable? Does it have a genetic component to it that we can actually breed from it? And can we measure it in sufficient volumes so that we can actually get these equivalent PTAs that we see for milk, fat, protein, and now with the likes of TB coming on? So they're the big questions from a scientific point of view as how we can actually move this forward. If we look at the methods that have been out there, and the methane collection has been going on for probably a couple of decades at this stage. The initial one was what was called a respiration chamber, where an animal actually got put into a big glass chamber and it monitored all the emissions of gases that were being excreted. And it's the gold standard in that it can measure all those emissions. But there's a downside to that, in that it's very cost prohibitive. There's a lot of labour involved with it. You can measure one animal at a time. There's very low throughput on the back of that. And there's also animal welfare issues in the sense that the animal has been removed from the herd. So there are a lot of question marks about how that can be sustained. The second method then that is gaining a lot of popularity now are these infra-breath analyzers. They're called sniffers. Okay, you can see there it's quite a small box that actually can measure that. And they're becoming quite popular as a solution for countries that would have a lot of milking robots, and that you can fit them as a hood at the front of the robot. And basically the Dutch breeding company CRV have invested heavily in this area, and they've installed 100 of these on 100 Dutch farms with the aim to collect about 10,000 cows with methane data over the next 3 years. And they're looking at EBVs in 3 to 4 years' time. Okay, and I suppose from that perspective, they're a relatively cheap piece of kit, and that the initial pricing they're around 5,000 or something less than 5,000 per unit. And I suppose they are cow friendly in that the cow comes into the robot, she doesn't see anything different, that she's getting her meal in the robot and is collecting the methane data at the same time. There are some downsides to it. It's an approximation. You're only collecting the ruminal methane. Now that is 95% of the methane. It's methane that comes out the mouth. But we know that robots are not predominant here in Ireland, so it's not an immediately practical solution here right now. The third source then are what they call the green feeds, and if you were coming in outside, you might have been wondering what the piece of kit out there was. That's the what's called the green feed system. Okay, so if we look at the pros to that type of system, it is a more practical device. Somewhat location flexible. The device out there is actually mounted on a trailer for pasture-based methane recording, but it can also be taken off and put into a shed for winter-based recording. It does offer the opportunity to record it on the cows and also growing animals, and they are growing in popularity worldwide. They are produced by the company CLOC in South Dakota in the States, and they have a backlog in terms of the demand for these machines. They're being exported all the way around the world. And I suppose it is cow friendly also, in the sense that the cow isn't actually being forced through the machine. Again, just collects the ruminal CH4. It does need a technician, because there's a lot of moving parts to it, updating the gas canisters, recalibrating, etc. And unfortunately, it's too expensive from an individual farmer's perspective. That machine out there is probably retailing at the moment about €70,000 just for that kit. So, moving on then, look, what do we have here in Ireland? What are we currently looking at? If we look at the locations there, we can see in Moore Park down the road, there are 4 of those machines installed. They've currently pushed about 280 dairy cows through them over a couple of years, where they've measured the full lactation. So there's a lot of good data coming through that's going to help to understand what's going on there. From the Tully perspective, it's a commercial beef feeding system. So there's about 1,360 cattle have gone through that system now at this stage, where they're measuring the feed intake, they're measuring the live waste, but they're also measuring the methane. So, as I say, that data is gathering. And what we can say about that is that by looking at the data, we're quite confident that a 3-week period of intensive measurement on those animals might be enough to give us enough to get a snap picture of a group of animals and how they rank, and so that data, if you were to repeat it 3 weeks later, that you'd actually get the same level of ranking in the herd. So that's the Tully performance test station. There's also some of these machines. There's 4 actually in UCD. Monitoring both dairy and beef cattle, and also in Grange, obviously, which is the beef centre, recording it on suckler cows and also finishing animals there too. You can just see a picture of the machine at Grass, but also the one at Tully. The one at Tully does need a barrier up to make sure that the animal isn't getting bullied as it's stuck in the machine, but also that you know for certain that that's the animal that's gone through the machine. And obviously, there's been a couple of projects there that have helped to fund what's there currently, such as the Green Breed project, the Master project, and obviously the Department of Agriculture have heavily invested in those machines to help get a handle on the methane emissions from an inventory point of view. So I suppose, look, the reasons for investment, they are numerous, but you can look at things like feed additives. What's the impact of different feed additives? Does that wane over time as the animal actually adapts to the additive? Looking at the diet, numerous studies, both in Tully maybe and also in UCD, looking at the effect of a total mixed ration diet, but also a high concentrate diet, which the bulls up there are being finished on, and comparing that then to the Moore Park herd, where you have the grass-based system. And what we've tried to do in recent intakes is actually take some of the progeny from the Moore Park herd and actually push them through the Tully system, so that you can actually get the grass-based measures on the cows, but also the TMR type diet on the progeny. And that will be a key piece of research to try and see is how well can you predict the grass-based measure on the cows from the young growing progeny that are going to a slightly different purpose. I suppose the main one then from an ICBF perspective is to try and develop genetic evaluations using that data. And if you think of it, it's an onerous task, given how expensive machines are and how practical it is to get them onto farm. And you're trying to capture that whole life cycle emission of greenhouse gases. So you can see there's a need to get from birth up to early in life, when the decision is made, and the cow goes on, that's the female, goes on for milk production, or if it's a terminal-based animal that's going on for meat production. I suppose, look, there's a number of questions there we have to try and answer. Is what's the trait definition? Is it a gross methane trait that we fit into the index, or is it a methane trait corrected for things like feed intake and carcass? Do we need a single EBV, such as what we have in age of slaughter now, or is it an EBV that will be growing or lactating animal, or is it an EBV that needs to be separate, depending on whether it's a TMR type diet or a grass based? They're all the questions. Key then will be the relationship with the other traits. Early indications are that feed intake drives a lot of the methane output, but that is not a very, very, very strong relationship. The Tully data is indicating that 70% of the methane output can be explained by feed intake. And I suppose then, look, how does that feed into the breeding programme? But the good news is that based on the 1,300 animals that have gone through Tully, is that the trait is heritable. It's in the region of 20 to 30%. So if you can replicate that on the cow side, it'll pitch it at a really nice level, much higher than traditional fertility traits, and just slightly lower than the milk production traits, which means you don't need as many animals then, given that the heritability is higher. And again, obviously, you know, the work on both of those, the feed/diet type and also the animal type, it'll be used then to update the national inventory, okay, both at a system level, such as what can we say is the average emission level, let's say, for bulls on a high concentrate finishing diet versus cows in early lactation on a grass-based diet. That data will then feed into national inventory. But then accounting for genetic merit, as we've seen there's initial results coming out of Moore Park that are indicating that the high EBI cows are at the same level of emissions, but also you're getting the benefit then of the higher milk output. So again, that will be reflected on the beef side as well. If we can demonstrate with the animals going through Tully that the commercial beef value of those animals has an influence on driving down the methane per kilo of carcass, then that will eventually feed into the inventory. So look, just to summarise, the active CH4 is being recorded at research level at the moment. It's trying to capture all the dynamics around that methane and the relationship with all the other traits. It's not at sufficient volumes for genetic evaluation. Certainly not on the dairy cow side. It'll probably come on the growing animal / finishing animal first, because the data at Tully is probably maybe a little bit ahead than where we are with the dairy cow. I suppose the key thing then is that the industry aligns then to collapse all that data and make it available for genetic evaluation. So there are a number of new initiatives coming on there. The Meat Technology Ireland are invested in 5 of these machines, but there's also a new funding call between New Zealand and Ireland that is going to fund 2 more of these machines that'll be active out there on dairy herds. I suppose, look, there is a need here maybe to engage with the power manufacturers, the non-robot manufacturers, to see if we can get a lower cost alternative that maybe that sniffer technology that's been rolled out in the Netherlands might be an option if they can actually fit it to other parlours. To really make the impact from a genetic evaluation perspective, we do start to need to get these herds out, these machines out into Gene Ireland herds, where the young sires that are going to influence the breeding programme are getting tested on, so you can get reliable proofs as we move forward. I suppose the goal within 3 to 5 years is that we'll have a direct methane trait feeding into the EBI and allowing you to see that there's actual differences there that have been driven by the different genetic lines that are out there. So again, that's the quick summary through here. Now I think Donna is coming down there. He's going to take a number of questions and chair the session.
Okay, great stuff. Thanks, Ross. And with that, I'd like to invite So as I said, joined with us now on the podium is Doreen Carden, the CEO of Munster Bovine. And what we're going to do for the next 20 minutes or so is just open it up to any particular questions that people have. Just put up the hand. Maybe if I might start there, Ross, the last question. So integrate directly into the EBI. You showed us the machine. How many records do you think we need? How many methane records would you be happy with to push out a genetic evaluation?
There's a few caveats there, Donna, but if they were coming from herds that were obviously genotyped, of sufficient size, and were a representation of the young sires that have been tested out there, you may be able to work with from 2,000 cows as an initial starting base, and obviously build from there. But obviously there's a few questions need to be answered. We know that there's data there on the Moore Park herd over the full lactation. Can we take a 21 or 30-day window of that that allow us then maybe to get a reasonably good prediction of the full lactation, so we can move those machines maybe around different farms? So caveat about 2,000 cows.
Any idea how long, Ross? How long? 2,000 records? How long will it take us?
Again, if we had one of those machines out on Kevin Downing's herd as just a trial there, and towards the autumn, Kevin 120-30 cows, one machine in the field, we saw it was probably in the region of a third of the cows may have visited it periodically. So you have to be conscious that the cows in Moore Park were probably trained to move it through the machine every day, whereas the natural behaviour is you're not going to get those cows to visit it all the time.
So how long?
Answer the question. If you throw all the machines that are there currently at it, Donna, you could get it in a couple of years, 2 years.
Great stuff. Any questions? Yep. Put up the hands, lads.
Johnny, makes that on.
And you mentioned there that with stakeholders you get involved with the direction of genomic testing. And I suppose, truthfully, stakeholders have been sitting on their hands. And that's why we are where we are with 2.5% of dairy females tested genomically. And farmers have been expected to fund this, and the stakeholders did not get involved, and it's good to see they are getting involved. But where do you see it going? Is it going to be at birth, or to accelerate it? What way do you see it going in the next couple of years?
The conversation, Johnny, is look, we expect this to level out at sort of €15 per calf, so the cost of genotyping. Now, the conversations have been, look, the first part of the cost is the tagging. So if we can have a DNA tissue tag that covers off genotyping, covers off any BVD requirement, so effectively that's the farmer contribution to the cost. You know, farmers buying the tags plus the postage and package back in, so there's guts of a fiver there. So it leaves €10 then for government and industry to come up with in terms of the difference. There's also a significant capital cost associated with genotyping out the cow herd, because you have to genotype the cows to then be able to do DNA calf registration. And that's certainly the conversation there has largely been, you know, the potential of government funding, potentially around sort of more infrastructural type of funding to try and help to support that. So that's where the conversations are at the moment, and in fairness there's been really good engagement on it. And look, our expectation is that it does then become, because of the cross-industry support, a priority project that will ultimately get funded in the context of this whole climate and environment challenge from an industry or standpoint.
Okay, my question is on the same thing, the genotyping. I'm a farmer, I'm not a scientist, but I have a little bit of common sense. And I question the value of genotyping all the animals for a number of reasons. Number one, it's going to be extra work, and dairy farmers are quite busy at calving time. Number two, it's going to take a certain length of time, which means that calves will not be able to be registered as fast as they can at the moment. And all this data is going to be stored in the cloud, which generates its own carbon footprint. And, if the AI companies, or if the work has been done with the male side, with the bulls, well, then it shouldn't be necessary to start looking at the females as well. That's my view, right?
Yeah, look, and maybe I'd make a couple of comments there on that one. First of all, you'd be surprised, you've identified the labour issue, particularly at a busy time. Well, I can assure you, any farmers that are in DNA calf registration would acknowledge that there's actually significant labour savings associated with it, because you're tagging the calf, which you have to do anyway, and then the database is working out the sire and the dam. So dam errors, which generally on dairy farms can run at 5 to 10% and higher, they disappear. Sire errors, you don't have to worry about the insemination record, or if you were running two stock or whatever, that gets tidied up. Sex errors is something that happens a lot on farms, which you have to talk to the DVO to get sorted. The genotype works that out. So these are all of the sort of the hidden benefits from a labour perspective. And I suppose if I go back to maybe the dairy beef discussion, you're right that we can drive a lot of this on the dairy side through the meals and the genomics part of that there. But if we go back to the calves in the ring earlier on, the one benefit of DNA calf registration is, whilst you'll see the benefit in terms of your heifer calves, you're right, but the minute that there's an error on a heifer calf, you've got the wrong dam here. Well, there's another dam, and if you don't do all of the calves, you won't be able to work out who the dam is. So that's why it becomes part of the whole picture. And then the calves, all of the calves are getting a beef merit, which rearers want, which will help dairy beef integration. So I do think that, like, for the cost of your tag, there's going to be a lot of benefits to you as a farmer and to the broader industry. And that's the way we have to pitch and present it. Did Stephen want to?
Yeah, just one comment. I think it's the best money we could spend from doing work on the genetics, having the genotype. It gives you the confidence to go in when you're buying your calf to know that, you know, that it is what it does. It's going to do what it says in the tin. And the importance of that genotype. We had some farmers, we give a bonus if they're by certain sires, 50% of them by the wrong sire. So we knew then next year, because of the genotype, we don't go back there. So it's very important for the beef farmer, and also I think for the dairy farmer. And it's your point, it's to build that link, that confidence, that integration between dairy and beef. So I think it's going to be a huge benefit when it comes, and the sooner the better. I suppose maybe the other point is, just you mentioned about that good beef animal versus the bad one. I obviously bought the good one, just want to be clear. And it's just, well, maybe moving on from that, so my second question is to Doreen. Breeding season next year is not too far away. We've our 2023 born animals or inseminations will be born in 2024. The animals will be killed in 25, 26. We haven't that many breeding seasons to get this stuff right. What's the top tips for a dairy farmer in selecting his bulls next year? There's the DBI, but there's also the sub-index of that. Could you maybe give some comments? I think it's really important.
Okay. The first thing, Stephen, is identify how many replacements the herd owner needs, and then identify the cows that are most suitable for the replacements. Do you know what I mean? So definitely avoid the double reds and the milk recording. And once you've identified the replacements, put sex semen on those, because then you're getting your replacements from the cows you want the replacements from. And then in selecting your beef sires, decide what your market is. Are you selling to the neighbour next door? Do you know what I mean? Are you going to the mart? What breed you decide? And then once you've decided what breed, you have your maiden heifers, you have your second calvers, you have your cows, and you have your very mature cows. So you have 4 groups of animals on the farm. And it's then a case of selecting a sire for each of those 4 groups that's easy calving, short gestation, and then try and get the high beef sub-index within the DBI. And mistake some herd owners make is they just buy one bull for across the board that'll do the maidens, the second calvers and the cows as if they had a stock bull. While when you're doing AI, you can select 4 different bulls that'll give you easy calving across the 4 groups, but will maximise the beef value in each of those 4 groups.
Hello. A question on the dairy beef index. I was looking at it maybe 2 years back, and at that time you were talking of using it on your, let's say, the latter end of your calving cows. And for those cows, basically, you wanted to tighten up the calving period. And the one problem with all the dairy beef index bulls was that the ones that were any good on dairy beef index, their gestation length was plus days, at least 0 to plus days, whereas if you used a Frisian bull, you're on minus days. So that has to be addressed in trying to get a shorter gestation length for these good dairy beef index bulls. The other thing is Andrew, you are saying that the slaughtering of calves is going to be banned from 2024, and I personally would have no wish to slaughter calves, but to me the whole thing is the greatest hypocrisy under the sun in all the Western societies. We have passed by overwhelming majorities various referendum over the last few years, yet the same people are worried about the killing of a few bull calves. I know it's not, and in New Zealand there is some of the retailers are saying that they won't take milk from dairy farmers who practice the bobby calf route. But look, that's the way we're going. That's what we'll have to deal with. The question is whether dairy farmers in the future will maybe have to pay a beef farmer to take the dairy calves. but I don't know do beef farmers want to feed calves. That's possibly the other issue. And the other issue then is on the DNA and the tagging of calves, whether to get the DNA sample and also for the BVD sample. I agree it's very time saving if you can do it when they're born. The one problem I have is that, and we had enrolled for the first year, and we ended up not doing it because you had to wait for the registration of the calves until the results of the DNA came back, and that was maybe 14 days. Well, I have a farm, I have a computer. I don't particularly want to be out in the shed calving cows, sitting on a bloody bale of straw, keying in stuff into my mobile phone. I want to put my results into my computer, have a log of all the health aspects that's associated with that calving at that time, register the thing, and the thing should be corrected afterwards. And there should be enough of joined up thinking with the DNA from ICBF to the Department of Agriculture animal database in the country, that the thing is corrected as soon as the figures come back to ICBF, because it would save an awful lot of hassle. And it's a lot easier to be putting stuff into a computer, having a nice warm cup of tea with your foot up against the radiator, than sitting on a bale of straw at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning.
Great stuff. Thanks, Brendan. There's loads of questions in there. Gestation length, turnaround time, Andrew has come up twice.
I'll cover that.
Yep.
Yeah, I'll take the gestation one. On the gestation, if we take the sex semen and the first 3-4 weeks of the breeding season, we can use bulls, that are plus 1.5 days gestation, because we're in the first 3 weeks of the breeding season. And now with the dairy herd plateauing and the increase in sex, we see more and more herd owners using beef, in the very first 3 weeks. And in EI this year, we saw a switch of 10% in the dairy herds from dairy, to actually beef, and quite a high proportion of that happened in the first 3 weeks. On the gestation, there is very good data there now from ICBF, and gestation is higher heritable. I think it's up to about 0.4. And if you look at the Angus panels that's there at the moment, there are bulls there, extremely easy calving, -3, -4 days in gestation, up to 8 to 9 kilos of carcass weight for maiden heifers, and up to 20 kilos of carcass weight for cows. So that has changed, Brendan. The panels are there now. And even looking at the Herefords, which is that bit harder at times to get the high carcass weight, we have bulls there with 9 kilos of carcass, and -1.5 days in gestation. So it has turned, but just remember the first 3 weeks, the gestation is not as critical, as coming up towards the end.
I'll pick up the turnaround time one there. In fairness, you're right, Brendan. It was 15 days was the average time from birth to submitted to the passport back to the farmer, sent back to the farmer. A couple of comments I'd make on that. First of all, it's still taking 6 to 7 days to get the tag off the farm. So the one thing we'd encourage farmers to do is, send them, get them registered, send them away. So that tells us it's actually 7 or 8 days is the sort of the time in the lab. And of course we are working to shorten that more, and with more capacity we will be able to do that. The other comment I'd make, and I was interested, your comment was right, and I know your preference in terms of how you like to do it, in terms of that's the approach you've had, but it's interesting that other dairy farmers, you can force through the registration anyway, as you know, without waiting for the DNA to come back. But the irony of it is that lots of the dairy farmers that were in the project didn't really want to do that, because they wanted to have the siren dam correct, and they knew the downside of pushing the registration through was, geez, this comes back as an error, I'm up in a heap, So anyway, just those couple of comments, and I hope maybe that addresses the question earlier as well, Donna.
And Brendan, you brought up the point about New Zealand. So sitting beside me here is Professor Dorian Garrick from Massey University and Teagasc Solutions. He's the Ross Evans of New Zealand. So I'm going to ask Dorian to comment about, we heard about environment, we heard about beef. What's New Zealand breeding doing for both of those?
Okay, thanks, Donna. There's been a little bit of negative comment, the negative feeling I've got from some of the people in the audience, and I just want to make a comment that it's something like 25 years or more since the first time I came to Ireland, and it's just remarkable the positive things that have happened in this country since that time. So the first time I came here, ICBF was just a concept. I think Crummy was probably in university or school. Most of the people involved in the industry from a science point of view were probably described the way people describe me now, as male, pale and stale. There was virtually no genetic gain, or if there was, it was coming from importations and it wasn't really being controlled by Ireland. There were fragmented databases, no information systems. And now we look at what's happened today and what we've seen in these various talks. We've got an amazing group of talented, passionate, young male and female researchers that are really trying to do things to improve Irish agriculture. We've got ICBF with amazing information systems showing you genetic trends and driving the direction that trend occurs in. So some fantastic things to be proud of. So environment, yes, big issue all around the world. I certainly have some sympathy for the comment that was made up here saying, why are we removing efficient animals from countries like Ireland and New Zealand and substituting production in inefficient countries? And I certainly share those concerns. But that's something we have to live with because our government signed up to those accords. In the environmental space, we have three issues that concern us, and we've heard about two of those here today. One of those is in the nitrogen space, and I'm sure you've done a lot of work on that as well. We had one AI company that promoted the idea that you could use milk urea nitrogen measurements from herd testing to select cows that had lower urinary nitrogen outputs. So we did a major research exercise where at great expense we measured the urinary nitrogen output of individual cows and demonstrated that in fact we could not use milk urea nitrogen for that purpose. But we have had to use other environmental methods like changing fertiliser practices to try and reduce our nitrogen issues into the groundwater. Methane was the other one we've talked about quite a lot today, and I think New Zealand was one of the countries that perhaps led this work in the livestock area with some of their selection experiments in sheep, and they demonstrated that methane was indeed heritable and you could make quite large differences in selection based on methane output. We were much slower than you guys were in implementing it in our cattle. So we have only relatively recently put green feed systems in, and over the last 18 months or more, LIC and CRV have measured the methane output of all of their young genomic selection bulls that are about to be used in the industry at the moment. There are still many people that are unsure about whether this will work or not, and it's something that they can't see. It's not like milk production that you see instantly, so there is a validation going on right at the moment where the most favourable and the least favourable methane bulls that are all high merit for our breeding worth are being progeny tested on commercial farms, and some large commercial farms, and the daughters will be brought back in to validate and demonstrate to everybody that you can make positive progress on the methane. The carbon area, we heard already from Lawrence, who's gone there, about some of the carbon issues in New Zealand. New Zealand has sort of let the market determine what the carbon price might be. It's gone up very high and had an incredibly unfavourable effect in that it's pushed up what forestry people are prepared to pay for very good sheep and beef farms and convert them totally to forestry. So we're seeing Pinus radiata or Monterey pine being planted on farms that have often been several generations in the same family with beautiful wool sheds and fences and everything, houses, and the government doesn't seem to recognise the unintended consequences of those kinds of activities. So a lot going on the forestry, which farmers are uncomfortable with, but we have been much slower than you have been about introducing the carbon evaluation into some of your indexes. And you may argue that it's just tinkering, but as we heard from Mags earlier today, that tinkering might give you a 50% better response than you would get from leaving the indexes the way they are now. The other issue is from a PR point of view. In the old days, most of the people who lived in cities had an uncle or a cousin or some other relative that was on a farm. We don't live in those kind of days anymore. Most of the city people have no connection to farming operations. So we need to have good PR and demonstrate that we're actually doing things and have indexes that convey that kind of information to them. And I think we've got a lot to learn from the work that you've already done over the last year or so advancing those concepts. So thanks, Don.
Okay. Unless there is any other final questions. So the guys, including Dorian, will be outside having a cup of tea and that. So what I might do is I might just close, and I think I got 5 main points from today. The first one actually is what Dorian alluded to, extremely positive, right? So the opposite of a challenge is an opportunity. The opposite of a challenge is an opportunity. And what we've heard today is the tools that are available to us to realise, to face down those challenges and realise those opportunities. Second point, and Dorian again touched on this, 3 times today I heard the word world first. Jonathan, Alan and Andrew. We are world leading. And like any good breeding programme, the next generation of young researchers, I'm not including Andrew and Ross in this, but this morning the next generation of young researchers is actually better than our older ones. So it is again from a sustainability perspective. The third point is that this is complementary. There is going to be no silver bullet to environmental and social responsibility. The breeding tools are complementary, or what we call they can stack on top of these feed additives, protected urea, etc. Fourth point is, and Mags alluded to it, is these things, your cows that you have in front of you are a function of what you did for the past 10 years. So the benefits, they accumulate over time and they remain permanent. But for me, more importantly, is you don't actually have to do anything different. You still have to put the cow and calf. It's as easy to put the cow and calf to a good bull as it is to a bad bull. It's not a cost. It's not like feed additives. You don't have this recurring cost. It's not a change in your farming system. It can actually happen if during the top of the pyramid, which it is doing, the top of the breeding pyramid is realising those benefits. And then my final point, and I believe this one is the most important. The Minister alluded to it. If we think about sustainability, we hear the narrative, to me it's all about environment. While, as the Minister said, there's this new thing called the sustainable food systems. There's 3 legs to the sustainability tool, right? Yes, environment is one of them. We've heard great tools today, the carbon index. Social responsibility, which is the beef component that Alan talked about and Mags brought in. But to me, it's all under that framework of economic sustainability, which is the EBI. The E in the EBI stands for Economic Breeding Index. So we have that framework. As Dorian talked about, we have the resources, we have the people, we have the database. To me, it's a no-brainer. So I would urge you to leave today really positive and not talk about challenges, but talk about opportunities. So with that, I think there's tea and coffee outside. So thank you very much.